So, the small nation of Nuderia had been on the brink of total ruin about 6 years ago, but behind their victories was this one particular mercenary band. They were known as the Fierce Beast Mercenaries. These guys pride themselves on being the strongest in the world, and honestly, every single one of them is worth like 1,000 men in battle. But then something really unusual happened. Whether it was actually true or just some rumor, from a certain point onward, people started saying that a kid had somehow joined their ranks. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to the ruined slums of a town. This young blonde boy with messy hair appears, looking completely worn down and exhausted. In another part of the slums, two muscular guys are just laughing together, having a good time. But the boy, he's just walking alone through these narrow, dilapidated streets. Then suddenly, the boy accidentally bumps into someone and gets knocked down hard. This beast mercenary with cat ears straight up yells at him to watch where he's walking. The boy just collapses right there in the street. Someone nearby comments that he's just a typical slum brat and asks if that guy's even okay. But another mercenary coldly says to just leave him. He'll probably drop dead somewhere anyway. The boy struggles to keep walking through the alley, barely holding it together. He reflects that he doesn't really know who he even is. Every time he thinks it's okay to just die, he remembers these words from his mother, a woman whose face he doesn't even know. The only thing he actually remembers is being raised while being called a monster. The boy's thoughts turn desperate as he grips the ground, and two phrases just keep echoing in his mind. Don't die, and find someone to love. He thinks about this armored figure, completely overcome with emotion. Ever since his foster parent died, those words have been the only thing supporting him until today. He wants to see them again. The kid's body went cold, and before he knew it, he fell asleep right there in the street. Then someone calls out, asking if he's still alive, and the voice tells him someone's calling him, saying to live. Suddenly, the boy wakes up gasping for air, completely disoriented and breathing heavily. A voice asks him if he's feeling better now. Meanwhile, the spiky-haired rescuer holds the blonde kid up, explaining that he was weak, so he gave him a pill. The stuff activates his body in one shot. The boy asks if this person helped him. The rescuer tells him to eat something and get some rest. He's only feeling better because of the medicine, so he should take care on his way home. Then the rescuer walks away down the alley, and the boy looks down at whatever was given to him, processing what just happened. But then the rescuer turns back casually. The boy's mind races as he stares at his savior's face, wondering if it could be, and he asks if this person is his dad. The rescuer responds with complete confusion. The rescuer immediately yells out that he's single and has no kids. The boy's like, "What the hell are you saying all of a sudden?" Then the boy explains that the only one who's ever helped him is this person right here. The rescuer, looking all flustered, says parents help their kids for free, but he's currently looking for a girlfriend, and also there's way more to it than that. But the boy argues back that if someone saved him, then that comes with great responsibility probably. The rescuer calls him a pretty cunning kid and realizes the boy's an orphan. The boy asks what he should do about this situation. Meanwhile, the rescuer's internally complaining that he saved himself a troublesome brat and wonders how to talk his way out of this mess. The rescuer decides to move past the gloomy talk and suggests they introduce themselves. The boy lights up at the idea. The rescuer says he's a swordsman, and the boy asks if he needs to introduce himself too. The rescuer confirms, of course. He gives his full title as Begonia, the heavenly sword of the Savage Mercenary Corps, with the Begonia Savage Mercenary Corps. The boy asks what Mercenary Corps even means. Begonia explains that it's an organization that fights for money. They stand together in the alley, the boy processing this new information. Then Begonia asks what the boy's name is. The boy introduces himself as Will. Begonia responds positively, saying that's a good name. He then tells Will he has a proposal for him, asking if he wants to join their mercenary corps at Begonia's place. So Begonia warns Will that this place is seriously dangerous. Like, he could get into trouble or even die here. He tells Will he needs to be ready for that, and Will just quickly agrees. But then Begonia asks if Will really understands the situation, and Will confirms he does. Begonia's thinking to himself, wondering if this level of threat isn't even enough to scare the kid off, but he decides to move forward anyway. Then suddenly, Begonia lunges at Will with weapons drawn. He declares this is the entrance test and tells Will to try to defeat him. He explains his sword would have been fine, but Will probably can't handle it, so he should just put up with this dagger instead. Will realizes pretty quickly that he can't beat Begonia. The mercenary looks incredibly strong. Begonia confirms that assessment, boasting that he's strong and considers himself one of the top 5 swordsmen in the world. He adds that he's fought entire nations before, including the Empire and the Holy Dragon Kingdom. Their mercenary band is hated all over the place. Begonia makes his position clear, stating that if Will can't beat him, he can't become a member. He asks Will if he wants to call it off, pointing out that if he loses, his life will just stay the same as it is now. Will grips his hands tightly, thinking that if he collapses again this time, he'll die for sure. Meanwhile, Will remembers words from his mother that still stick with him. The memory surfaces clearly in his mind, telling him to find the one he loves, the one who must not die. Will steels himself with determination, refusing to die like this. Begonia notices the change in Will's expression and tells him he's got good eyes now. He takes that as Will being ready. Begonia asks Will if he could die, and whether he's scared of that. Will hesitates for a moment, then it hits him. If he goes back to his old life, he'll die anyway. He knows he has to win here. So Will yells that he can't die and charges straight at Begonia with everything he's got. Meanwhile, Begonia just holds his weapon steady, waiting for the attack. Then the fight breaks out. Will throws himself at Begonia with raw desperation. They clash hard, and Begonia starts to realize something's off. He's thinking to himself, what the hell is this kid actually? But then Begonia realizes Will isn't just some random kid. Even though Will's on the ground now, he's still fighting, still alive. Begonia actually grins, thinking he might have found himself a real good catch here. He admits the test was just meant to be an excuse to chase Will off, but the kid hasn't lost yet, and he's not dead. Begonia gets excited and yells that this is getting interesting. He calls out for Will to come on. Will charges forward again, declaring he won't lose, that he's fighting for the sake of survival. Then Will unleashes everything he has, shouting that he's going to become a mercenary, and the pressure and intensity radiating from him catches Begonia completely off guard. Begonia reacts with surprise at the sheer force coming from this starving kid, but then Begonia stares at Will with recognition washing over his face. He realizes something incredible. It feels like he's looking at the captain. Begonia declares he's convinced that this kid will definitely become essential to them. He grins wide and tells Will to show him his power, and the fight intensifies as Will keeps pushing forward. Then the clash ends. Will stands there and says he's fine. Meanwhile, Begonia's weapon lies broken on the ground. Begonia reacts in shock as he processes what just happened. So Will finally collapses from pure exhaustion, like he just admits it himself that he pushed way too hard. Begonia stands over him, and you can tell he's thinking back on everything that just went down in that fight. He tells Will that he fought in a way no kid should even be able to, and then Begonia starts reflecting on his own past, wondering if he ever radiated that much fighting spirit when he was younger. Then he explains something pretty wild. Originally, Will was supposed to lose. He was never supposed to be accepted into the group at all. But here's the thing. Begonia decides to take Will to meet the captain anyway. The reason is simple. Will has promising potential. This whole encounter with Begonia becomes the first step in the birth of Will, the mercenary corps apprentice, who would one day shake the entire nation. Meanwhile, Will remembers his foster parents' final words. They're just echoing in his mind. Don't die. Find someone to love. There were times when those words came to mind and he stopped being himself, like they weighed on him that much. Then Will's eyes open, and this dark-haired person looks at him and says, he's awake. Will wakes up confused, and the dark-haired woman nearby tells him Begonia will be back soon. Will asks who she is and where he is. She introduces herself as Silk, summoner of the Fierce Beast Mercenary Corps. The caption identifies her as the Phantom Beast Princess of the Corps. She tells him this is just an inn, and Will realizes there are other members in the Mercenary Corps too. Silk confirms there are 8 of them in total. Will asks what a summoner does, so Silk offers to show him and starts to cast a summon, but someone interrupts her before she can finish. Suddenly, a man bursts in and yells at Silk, asking if she's an idiot trying to wreck the inn. Someone in armor warns that the vice captain will chew her out again, but Silk fires back that even Begonia got drunk and wrecked a liquor store. The man tells her not to bring that up. Then Silk calls him Dad and tells him not to get in the way. He yells at her to stop calling him Dad. Meanwhile, someone asks about the vice captain. The innkeeper figures it'll take a little longer and suggests grabbing a quick bite. Will asks if he failed his entrance exam, but the man tells him nope and says today's schedule is perfect, though someone points out he said that last time too and was late then. The innkeeper explains he gave Will's entrance exam a pass with a huge bonus from Begonia. Someone calls him Father Begonia in thanks, and he yells at them to stop calling him Father. A server brings out the food and Silk exclaims how good it looks. Dishes are spread across the table as Will stares at the feast in complete amazement. Someone tells him to eat up and asks if this is his first time having something like this. Will makes an overwhelmed sound of disbelief. Will attacks the food with wild abandon, diving in without any restraint. The guy's eating like he's never seen a meal before. Silk watches him eat messily and asks if no one ever taught him how to eat properly. Will just grunts in response, too focused on the meal to care about anything else. Then Silk tells someone to teach Will how to use the silk dishes, and she agrees with a simple acknowledgement. Will excitedly yells for them to teach him, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm like a kid on Christmas morning. Silk demonstrates proper table manners to Will, showing him how to use the utensils first while smiling sweetly at him. Will watches as she instructs him step by step, actually paying attention this time. After the quick lesson, Will calls out to Begonia as his master. The whole scene has this sibling-like quality to it that's pretty wholesome. Begonia accepts him, telling Will to call him master and that he'll take him on as his disciple. Turns out Will picks things up pretty quickly when he's not stuffing his face. Later at the dining table, A beast-like mercenary takes offense when someone comments that Begonia actually eats quite neatly. The mercenary finds the observation straight up rude. But Begonia explains that a swordsman values manners and pride, so that's why he maintains proper etiquette even in a place like this. He tells Will to look people in the eye when they're talking to him, passing on some real wisdom. Meanwhile, someone asks the group if they've met up with the vice captain yet. The innkeeper snaps at someone not to call themselves his dad in front of Silk, insisting there are more important matters to deal with. Another person mentions there's still time and asks what they should do next. Will gets excited about seeing a summoning, and Begonia suggests they head somewhere spacious for the demonstration. Silk agrees, mentioning that Begonia interrupted her earlier, so she'll show Will now. Meanwhile, Begonia warns everyone not to get in the way this time. They head outside to an open area under a large tree, and Silk declares this spot should work fine for the summoning demonstration. Then, Will tells Begonia he wants to be like him. Silk asks Will if he wants to use magic too, and Begonia explains that he's a swordsman but uses magic as well. Silk comments that Will is turning out as expected for her disciple, adding that she does the same thing. Will confirms he does want to learn magic, but then Will insists Begonia is his one and only master. Begonia brushes it off casually, pointing out their mercenary group is full of magic pros, so Will won't be short on masters. Silk asks Will if he has an aptitude for magic, and Will confirms he does. Begonia explains that without the proper aptitude, summoning won't work. Silk decides to demonstrate for him now, and a magical circle begins forming at her feet. Suddenly, the summoning activates with tremendous force. A massive beast materializes through the magical circle, with dramatic energy swirling around it. Begonia immediately yells for Will to get behind him for safety, then tells Will to watch closely as the creature takes shape before them. The massive summoned beast towers over Will, an overwhelming presence of raw power. Silk announces, "This is the world's strongest organization, the Fierce Beast Mercenary Corps." Standing before the creature with total confidence, Silk explains this is the Phantom Beast Princess Silk's summoning spell, then asks Will if it's pretty cool. Will just stares up at the display, completely amazed by what he's seeing. Silk mentions that Fenrir's Rill is cute. Will approaches the beast and asks if he can touch her. The creature Rill reassures him not to worry. She won't bite. Will gets to pet the massive beast while Silk watches, commenting on how cute the interaction is. Then Will immediately demands that Silk teach him summoning. Silk tells him she'd like to teach him, but it's still too soon for him. She confirms that Will is 17 and explains that things like summoning can only be used after proper training. Begonia chimes in, telling Will he first has to start by sensing his mana. Silk mentions it even took her 3 months, so for Will it might take about half a year. Suddenly Will yells that he felt it. Silk responds with confusion. Will explains that he sensed during the summoning that slimy, murky stuff flowing through his body. Begonia calls bullshit, insisting there's no way mana spreads that fast. But Will describes how it feels like it's about to overflow any second now. A dramatic moment unfolds as power surges around Will, and Begonia's expression grows serious. He admits he forgot something important. Will recalls the pressure he felt back then, that overwhelming sensation from before. Meanwhile, Silk thinks back and confirms they had a magic power meter. Suddenly, Begonia realizes what this could mean and calls out to Silk, and she responds that she'll bring it. Silk returns holding an elaborate mechanical device and explains that the magic meter runs on the mana she sends to the handle. Will just needs to place his palm on it. The device has liquid inside, and the level it rises to shows the amount of mana. If it reaches halfway on the scale, that's already considered quite a lot. Will asks if he can become a summoner, but Silk reassures him not to worry. There's no pain or anything. He admits he doesn't know yet since this only measures magic power, but he'll give it a try. Silk sets the device down for him to use. Then something immediately goes wrong. The liquid inside the meter starts boiling. Begonia notices something is off, and suddenly the magic meter violently explodes in Will's hands, shattering completely. Silk stares in shock, realizing it's impossible to measure, and Begonia confirms his eyes didn't deceive him about Will's power. Will declares he's decided, and just like that, Begonia and Silk stand together and announce that they, the strongest Fierce Beast Mercenary Corps, will raise him. Then they arrive at what looks like a massive dungeon entrance. Someone reports no irregularities in the area, and the innkeeper thanks them. Will stands between Begonia and Silk as they prepare to enter. Begonia assures everyone that with Rill around there's nothing to worry about. Silk agrees, explaining that Rill is a top-class monster. No one, human or monster, would dare attack her. Someone mentions they should be fine for the 2 days until they reach headquarters at this rate, but another voice chimes in that carelessness is the enemy, and someone responds that they already know. Meanwhile, Begonia thinks to himself that the surroundings aren't a concern, so the problem is something else. Inside the carriage, the armored figure sits across from Will and states plainly that Will can't join. A few hours earlier, Begonia and Will were out searching for the vice captain's location. Begonia recalls that it should be around here if his memory's right. Will asks if they're really in the right place, then nervously asks if the vice captain is a scary person. Begonia admits the vice captain's a bit hard to deal with, but he's way smarter and more reliable than them. He continues explaining that the vice captain's so serious that even a tiny mistake makes him blow up. Begonia's gotten chewed out so many times because of that. Silk reassures Will that he can handle it. Begonia agrees that if it's Will, they'll be fine, and they should get going. They spot the vice captain in the distance and call out to him. The vice captain, a suited man with glasses named Solio, acknowledges Begonia's arrival. Solio notes that Begonia's 15 minutes late again, then asks when Begonia will ever fix that habit of being late. Begonia asks if the vice captain's in a bad mood today, then quickly apologizes, saying it hasn't happened. Someone mentions this is Begonia's fault, but Solio just brushes it off, saying whatever, that's fine. Solio tells them he's already accounted for the delay when making the schedule, then orders them to get in the carriage quickly. Solio asks Will if he's the orphan Begonia mentioned. Will hesitates for a moment before starting to introduce himself, saying it's nice to meet him. But Solio cuts him off, stating he doesn't approve of this. There's no benefit in letting a kid join the mercenary corps, and if anything, Will would just get in the way. Solio tells Will to get inside the carriage for now, explaining that since this isn't something he can decide on his own, he'll let Will meet the commander instead. Begonia says he'll ride up front and tells Will to hang in there. Meanwhile, Silk quietly calls out to Master Begonia, and someone mentions they'll handle guarding the area. So after an awkward ride with the vice captain, that's what happened. And now, here they are. Inside the carriage, Will nervously tries making some small talk, commenting on how nice the weather is. Solio responds flatly that it does. Will tries again, this time mentioning how amazing the carriage is, but Solio gives the same flat response. Will starts to address the vice captain again, but Solio cuts in, telling Will there's no need to force conversation. Solio states he doesn't feel the necessity to talk with him, and Will quietly agrees. Then Will asks what it is about him that Solio doesn't like. Solio clarifies that it's not that he dislikes Will or anything. Solio explains that Will's gonna be a liability for them. He's not sure if it's because Will has weak magic, but that's the issue. Will responds that he'll get stronger without bothering anyone. Here's the rewritten script for natural voiceover. Soleo asks if that's it then. Like, Will's really not gonna bother anyone anymore. Then Soleo extends his hand toward Will in this kind of challenging gesture. Sitting in the carriage with his arms crossed, Solio tells Will to prove it. He needs to actually prove he's not just going to be a nuisance. And Will reacts with this intense look of shock and determination at the sudden challenge. The scene opens on the countryside landscape, trees dotting the horizon. Will bursts forward with explosive energy, magical effects swirling around his body as he launches himself into motion. Meanwhile, Begonia watches from near the carriage, and inside, Solio crouches in a ready stance, observing Will's movements closely. Will calls out what he recognizes. Teleportation magic. Solio confirms that, yeah, it's his magic. Will questions it again like he can't believe it. Teleportation magic? But Solio cuts him off, saying that doesn't matter right now. Then Solio gets serious, stating that the magic power measure Will used today is a very expensive magic tool, and Will broke it. Solio explains that Will already has a negative score with them. But here's the thing. He'll give Will a chance to bring that negative score back to zero. Will's expression shifts to hopeful determination at the possibility. Solio continues, explaining that the magic tool is made from a very rare flower, adding that, in other words, Will is already a negative existence to them. Suddenly, the scene shifts to a massive stone creature towering before them in the forest. Solio points upward and tells Will it's up there, so please go get it. Solio's expression becomes serious as he says so first. Back in the forest clearing, someone calls out, asking Will to please get down from there quickly. Another voice pleads for help. A figure descends rapidly through the air. Will looks up with fierce determination on his face, saying if he can get that, Solio will acknowledge him. Solio remarks that, well, for a kid like Will, that's totally out of reach. Will's eyes widen with shock and determination at the challenge. Suddenly, there's a violent impact and Will goes tumbling hard through the air. Then Solio tells Will that, as expected, this is difficult for a child, and he can give up if he wants. But Will's face fills with fierce determination as he declares he'll never give up. Will launches himself forward with explosive energy, talking about using the sludge inside his stomach. Solio's eyes widen in shock as he reacts to whatever Will's doing. Solio observes something strange happening. Will realizes his body feels lighter than before. The momentum carries him forward, and he can't stop, spinning through the air with increasing speed. Will crashes hard into something with violent force, debris and impact effects exploding around him as he collides. Solio tells Will he can't just use magic power by brute force. Will asks what he should do then, and Solio begins explaining the proper technique. First, Will has to feel the magic power within his body. Then next, he needs to consciously let it flow through his whole body. Solio mentions the gooey stuff inside Will's body. Will responds that he can already do that. Solio continues his instruction, telling Will to let the magic flow from the top of his head to the tips of his toes and feel all the magic flowing through him. Solio reflects on how Will's the one who's controlled that vast magic since birth, then tells him to let it circulate through his whole body. Will thanks the vice captain for the guidance. Will stands there with fierce determination, fist clenched against his chest as he focuses on the magic flowing through his body. Energy explodes around him as he channels his power. Meanwhile, Solio watches from the side and acknowledges the effort with a quiet grunt. Will presses his hands against Real's massive furry body, feeling the magic circulating through his system as he practices the technique Solio taught him. Then Will declares he's got it, reaches forward and makes contact again with explosive force, successfully executing the magic flow technique. The training's clearly paying off as he manages to replicate the movement. In a brilliant flash of light, Will successfully performs the teleportation. Solio watches as the kid vanishes and reappears. But Will collapses afterward, completely exhausted from the magical effort. Solio examines him thoughtfully. Solio tells Will he's got it, admits that to tell the truth he had planned to leave Will at some orphanage somewhere. But Will risked his life to take on Solio's impossible challenge, and that wasn't something that could be done easily, even with Will's magical power and talent. Plus, Will also took his advice to heart and succeeded. Solio notes that Will might actually be a good kid, unlike the other problem children in the group. Then Solio calls out Will's name and officially declares that he acknowledges him. Will thanks the vice captain enthusiastically. Solio tells him to come on. They should head back quickly. Solio and Will are traveling toward the Mercenary Corps headquarters in a vehicle when Will asks if the captain is a scary person. Meanwhile, someone notices what Solio's doing and asks him what he's writing. Turns out it's a letter addressed to the captain. Solio reassures Will that the captain is actually a very pleasant person. Then, later during their journey, Solio mentions he'll be teaching Will teleportation magic as well. Will celebrates the news with enthusiasm, totally hyped about it. The scene transitions to show Will successfully pulling off a teleportation spell, but then he collapses from exhaustion right after. Meanwhile, somewhere else, a figure sits in meditation pose in an ornate hallway. But then Will starts dreaming about his past, and it's not a good one. In the nightmare, he recalls being raised by a cruel old man who called him a monster. The painful memories keep surfacing, reminding him that he had no one to love and no one ever loved him. Suddenly, someone calls out to wake Will up. When he finally opens his eyes, tears are streaming down his face. To Will, waking up to find someone there who smiled at him kindly meant everything. Solio tells him they're almost at their destination, and it was a moment that would mark the beginning of days that felt like a dream. The massive castle fortress of the Mercenary Corps comes into view, and for Will, it represents the beginning of days that would feel like a dream. Begonia announces their arrival to Will and the vice captain, as Will just stares in complete amazement at the building before him. The realization hitting that this is actually the Mercenary Corps headquarters. Taking in the sight of this enormous building, Will calls it home. Meanwhile, Begonia explains that the Mercenary Corps headquarters is located right in the middle of the royal capital. Then Solio mentions that the captain is waiting for them, and Begonia tells Will they should head inside. An excited voice eagerly responds to the vice captain's instructions. But Begonia just stands there, completely confused about what's happening. The other mercenaries start commenting that they've never seen the vice commander make such a soft expression before. Suddenly, Silk appears and greets them all cheerfully. Will asks if lots of people live in such a big house, and Silk tells him no, explaining that their mercenary band of 8 can barely handle the place. She comments that Will is just as expected of her student, and Solio quietly acknowledges her statement. Will stares up at the massive entrance hall with its grand double doors and ornate decorations, barely able to contain his amazement at how spacious everything is. The emotions overwhelm him as the reality sinks in. Starting today, this place will be his home, and the weight of it all hits him hard. Looking up with wide eyes, Will takes in the enormity of the headquarters and asks if they're really going in here. Meanwhile, Begonia notes that Will's magic is still leaking out as much as ever, and someone tries to reassure the kid that the captain isn't a bad person. Then the group enters the grand hall with its sweeping staircase. Solio announces his return to the captain, and a voice responds with this distinctive laugh, welcoming him back. The captain's been waiting for them. Suddenly, an armored figure descends dramatically from above with explosive force. This is Rock, the captain of the Fierce Beast Mercenaries, and he comments that Solio seems to have picked up an interesting kid. Will greets Rock nervously. Suddenly, Rock releases this intense pressure out of habit, then immediately apologizes and asks for forgiveness. He's wondering whose kid this even is, noting that Will has an insane amount of magic power, even more than Silk's. Soleil tells Rock that the kid's talent is the real deal and he wants to look after him here. Meanwhile, Begonia mentions they found him in the back alley of the frontier. Soleil asks if Rock will let Will join them, assuming he's already heard about the situation. Rock acknowledges that Will has talent, but points out he's still just a little kid. He seems to be considering whether Will actually wants to join. Will processes the possibility of joining the team. Then Rock starts to refuse, saying he can't let Will in. Someone calls out in protest. But Will's heart sinks as he realizes he finally met everyone, and now he'll be alone again. Will's thoughts echo in his mind. When he's all alone, no one will love him. Meanwhile, the mercenary members look on as Rock makes his initial statement. Rock tells Will plainly that as he is now, it's impossible. The captain explains they can't allow anyone weak to join officially. Will needs to learn to protect himself. Rock tells Will to get stronger, and until then, that's how it will be. Then Rock places his massive hand on Will's head and says he'll take care of Will as an apprentice. Rock starts giving orders. First thing is a bath. He tells Begonia to show Will the way. Begonia responds that he's got it and tells Will to come on and follow him. Rock tells Silk to get some clothes ready that look like they'll fit, and Silk says she understands. Rock makes it clear to Will that there are no free meals and he'll work properly as an apprentice. After the bath, Will thinks about how good the warm water felt. He notices the clothes are a bit big on him. As he walks through the hallway of the mansion, someone calls out, asking who's not done yet. Will notices something smells nice. He wonders if it's dinner after the bath. Will enters what appears to be a dining hall and introduces himself. He's the new apprentice joining the mercenary group starting today, and his name is Will. Someone immediately asks if he's a cook. Then a mercenary named Wardock introduces himself. Another voice comments that being an apprentice is pretty impressive for someone so small, while someone else from the background bluntly asks who the hell this kid even is. Another person notes the place looks pretty busy. Suddenly, Rock appears dramatically and tells Will he's not going to be eating for free around here. Will's going to work hard as an apprentice. Will's face completely shows his shock at the intensity of it all. Then Will recalls Rock's words about working properly as an apprentice and how those who don't work aren't actually apprentices. He thinks desperately that if he doesn't work, they won't let him stay here. Will insists he is helping, and the large cook acknowledges him. Later, Will's carrying a tray through the dining area when someone asks if that's Will, and another person asks if he's helping out. Will spots Begonia, Soleil, and Silk and calls out to everyone. Rock comments that Will's already proving useful to the mercenary group. Soleil says as expected of his student and tells Will well done. Will thanks his master while someone else comments with approval. The group stands together, looking pleased with how things are going. Will gets surrounded by the mercenary group, lifted up and celebrated like a hero. His thoughts drift back to how different everything is now, compared to those days when no one loved him. This moment feels impossible to imagine. The mercenaries gather together, raising their drinks high. The large cook, Soleil, Silk, Begonia, Rock, and the others all toast as one. Will thinks about how a day like this actually came, where he gets to share a warm meal with warm people. Will's face shows pure emotion. He feels so happy right now, but more than that, he wants to be more helpful to everyone. After the meal, empty plates sit scattered across the table. Then someone approaches Rock and tells the captain they've received a request. Rock says to let him see it. Rock looks over the request and comments that this kind of thing is night order work. Soleil responds that the nights must be short-staffed. Someone else agrees enthusiastically. Then another voice chimes in, suggesting that for a mission of that level, the captain doesn't even need to step in. They should just leave it to Silk or Begonia instead. Rock announces that he'll go on that mission with Will, and suddenly, someone's eye narrows in reaction. Will looks up at Rock and questions him, while Soleil calls out to the captain in surprise. Will repeats the word mission, his face showing complete shock as Rock's fist clenches with determination. Then Rock grabs Will and launches into motion at incredible speed. Soleil protests that it's too soon to give Will his first mission. Meanwhile, Rock and Will fly through the air above the city, before landing with serious impact on a street below. Rock carries Will on his shoulder as they touch down, and Rock laughs and asks Will if it was fun. The trip through the skies? Will responds in amazement, asking if the captain could actually fly. But Rock explains that it wasn't flying, just body reinforcement. He only jumped using body reinforcement. Rock reminds Will that he did it in front of the vice captain too. Will asks if that's the stuff someone pours into their body, and Rock confirms it. Will comments that his face looks scary, and someone agrees that's probably it. Then Will realizes that what Rock just did is pretty much the highest level of that ability. Will asks why Rock brought him along then. Rock reminds him that he told Will he has to be able to protect himself, and that's what this is for. Rock's face becomes intense as he declares that this is training. Then Rock explains that the mission is about tracking down the culprit behind that kidnapping case that's been causing a stir lately. And when Will repeats the word training, Rock confirms that's exactly why he brought Will along on this mission. Once they find the culprits, they'll nab them, though Will can't help but wonder if he can actually pull this off. Meanwhile, Rock tells Will he's going to teach him body reinforcement right here, right now. Will asks if they're doing it immediately, then suddenly realizes what Rock means. Rock grins and admits that, yeah, maybe it's a bit tough for Will at this moment, but the two of them start running through the city streets anyway. As they move, Rock asks Will if he's already flowed his magic through his whole body for enhancement, and Will confirms he has. Rock then instructs him to focus that magic power on a single point now, and at the same time, he needs to create a magic bullet. The technique is called magic bullet. Will tries, but notes it doesn't go so well. Rock yells at Will to stay focused and reminds him that visualization is key. Will launches himself forward, thinking he needs to first enhance his body and close the distance, telling himself he'll become stronger as he tries to visualize and focus. Meanwhile, the kidnappers watching from below recognize Rock and realize the leader of the savage beast mercenaries is here. They can't believe it. Will continues pushing forward with his magic enhancement when Rock suddenly realizes he overdid something. Someone reacts in shock, but Rock encourages Will that it's fine and to keep going just like that. Will focuses harder on getting stronger and concentrating his magic, then releases a magic bullet, thinking of everyone's sake. Rock praises Will, saying it's as expected of him. An explosion erupts over the city buildings, and Rock notes that being able to do it after just one lesson is seriously impressive. One of the kidnappers yells in frustration, demanding to know why the hell Rock is here. Will asks what they mean, and Rock explains this is for training his apprentice. He adds that their job ends here, and they'll hand the criminals over to the knights soon. Rock sees the knights approaching and tells Will it looks like they're here, calling for them to head back. Then Will asks if he helped. Rock encourages him to keep pushing himself, telling him that once he's stronger, he'll be even more helpful. Rock adds that he'll train hard too and have War Dog help out a lot, muttering to himself that it sounds good. Rock announces they'll train every day starting today. Will agrees enthusiastically, declaring he wants to be helpful to everyone, saying he'll work a lot. 1 month later, someone mentions they need to solve this fast, and another person agrees, saying they should just get started already. The caption reads, "The Will works too much meeting." Meanwhile, Begonia sits there with his phone looking frustrated while Will appears concerned in the library setting. Begonia addresses Will directly, telling him he's working way too much and they need to start the meeting. Then Silk points out that everyone has probably noticed Will is clearly working way too much, emphasizing this is obviously not the amount of work a child should be doing. Silk continues, explaining that Will is going to break down soon, describing how he does chores until midnight and helps Wardock from dawn. Meanwhile, Begonia mentions that the other day when he tried to forcibly reduce Will's workload, he discovered Will was even training in his spare time. Someone states that Will doesn't know what it means to rest, but the response comes that this is exactly why they have to teach him. Silk declares that teaching him is the responsibility of adults. Begonia and Silk agree they need to take Will outside. Meanwhile, Will's standing there holding his cleaning supplies, and he reacts with surprise to the suggestion of a day off. Begonia tells Will not to do any work today. Then Silk adds that training is no good either, and he should go outside and play like a kid. Will responds that he got it, and he'll play after finishing his current tasks, mentioning he still needs to clean the upstairs hallway and take care of other things. But then Begonia starts listing off the remaining tasks Will still plans to do, including helping with lunch, cleaning things up, and taking out the trash. Begonia physically holds Will back as the kid clutches his cleaning supplies, telling him he'll handle all that himself. Will grabs tighter onto his broom handle as Begonia restrains him. Then Will protests desperately that he can't stay here, that he has to work and has to be useful to everyone. His distressed expression shows the kids genuinely panicking. Will's mind spirals as he questions whether he's just not needed anymore, asking if that's why they're sending him out. Later at the inn, someone comments that Will took the captain's words about no free meals at face value. Rock looks exasperated, demanding why he's the one getting treated like the bad guy here. Meanwhile, Silk holds a crying Will, announcing that Begonia made him cry. Rock tries to reassure Will, telling him he's more than pulling his weight. Silk adds that Will is doing his best. Begonia agrees, saying everyone's been helped by Will, and he makes it clear that nobody thinks Will is useless. Then Begonia suggests that Will should go out with Silk. Silk apologizes for keeping Will waiting, but when she arrives, Will's just standing there still wearing his work apron. She asks why he's still wearing the thing, and Will responds that this is all he has. That's when Silk realizes she only gave him something that looked like it might fit. So Silk proposes they head into town today to buy Will some actual clothes. Will mentions he doesn't have any money, but Begonia tells him not to worry about it. The narration notes that today is Will's day. Meanwhile, Will and Silk walk through the gates toward town, heading into the city together. Will marvels at what a dazzling city it is, and Silk explains that's because it's the noble district. The streets are lined with elegant shops and well-dressed people just walking around. Silk points toward a particular store, telling Will they're heading in there. Will looks completely overwhelmed as they approach the shop entrance. Inside the fancy shop, Will looks overwhelmed by everything around him. He tells Silk this isn't a place he should be, that it's way too expensive. But Silk reminds him that he said not to worry about the money. She's holding a massive stack of clothes and tells him to just try them on for now. Will tries on the first outfit, and Silk tells him he won't know if it suits him until he tries it, so he should go through all of them. Will agrees and starts the whole trying on process. Will comes out in one of the outfits and asks how it looks. Silk thinks it's cute and tells him it looks really good on him. They move to the next one, though Silk notes this current outfit might be a bit too casual. The montage continues as Will tries on outfit after outfit. Comments fly around about each one being cute, too rough, not very wizard-like, or just moving on to the next. Then the trying on session escalates with more people weighing in. Begonia and other mercenary corps members start giving their opinions. Comments range from cute to too flirty to overposed to looking like a villain. The rapid-fire fashion show continues with everyone calling out their reactions. Silk asks if they have more options, and the cycle keeps going with the last outfit coming up next. Will emerges in the final outfit, a white coat with black boots and proper adventure gear. He asks Silk what she thinks of this one. They leave the shop, the shopkeeper thanking them for their business. Silk comments that it took a while, but she made a good purchase. Meanwhile, Will tells her he's happy she bought him clothes, though there's clearly something on his mind. Walking through the streets afterward, Will thinks to himself that if this is what a day off is like, he'd rather be working. Meanwhile, Silk realizes she got too carried away and swung things around too much with all that shopping. Then Silk asks Will if he's never been to the castle before. Will repeats the word, clearly unfamiliar with the concept. They're standing in the royal capital's center area, with grand architecture visible around them. Silk asks if he wants to do some sightseeing. Silk points out that this is the royal castle as they walk near the grand structure. She tells Will that the courtyard's flower beds are really famous and suggests they go there. Will agrees. In the royal garden, Will sees the beautiful flower beds and the elegant nobles walking around in their fancy clothes. He thinks to himself that it's a beautiful garden with beautiful people, but still something feels off. Like, these guys have other things to do, right? Will lies on the ground looking up and calls out to Silk. Silk notices something's off and asks Will why he looks a little down, but Will quickly apologizes and says it's nothing. Then they arrive at the flower bed area, and Silk explains that they even hold social gatherings here. Will is immediately captivated. He says it's beautiful. Looking at another section, he gets even more excited and says this one's even prettier, and Silk agrees enthusiastically. Silk calls out to Will to look at something, but suddenly a voice interrupts them, asking how about that and commenting that it's a beautiful sight. A large, well-dressed nobleman appears with his entourage. He introduces himself as Duke Belrant Bas, and explains that he personally invested a large sum in this place. In other words, it belongs to him. The noble ladies in his group comment on how amazing it is. But then the Duke notices Will and asks who that brat is. Duke Bass kicks Will hard, telling him he's in the way and to move. And just like that, Will gets knocked straight to the ground. Silk screams Will's name as he goes down. She rushes over and says, "Thank goodness," while Will tells her he'll be fine. Then someone in the crowd asks if she's a beast princess. Silk's eyes flash with intensity as she confirms that, yeah, this kid is her disciple. But the Duke's people tell her not to play dumb. There's no way she doesn't know who Duke Bass is. They ask if she's really acting like this knowing that. Meanwhile, Duke Bass yells at them to remember the name of Duke Bass, the man who stands at the pinnacle of nobility. He's one of the few ducal houses in this entire kingdom. Silk yells at him to shut up and says that's no reason to kick Will. The Duke responds by asking what's wrong with cleaning up a filthy brat who was blocking his way, then dismisses Will as probably just a commoner, or an orphan anyway. Meanwhile, Duke Bass keeps going, sweating and yelling at Silk. He shouts that the bastards from the fierce beast mercenary corps are all the same, calling them worthless trash with uncertain status. Silk just stands there with intensity radiating from her. Then Will draws his sword, his face intense with anger, declaring he'll never forgive anyone who insults his mercenary comrades. Duke Bass calls him an impertinent brat and yells for the guards to throw them out. The guards nervously respond, confirming the order with obvious hesitation. But then Silk stands there in full armor, an imposing figure towering over the entire scene, and states that even after understanding who she is, only those who still wish to touch that child should take a step forward. The guards look absolutely terrified as Silk tells them to be gone before she gets any angrier. Duke Bass tries to rally them, though, asking what they're so afraid of. He dismisses Silk as just a commoner from some foreign land, saying that so-called Phantom Beast Princess is nothing special. Meanwhile, Will just sighs at this whole situation. Begonia tells Will they should go, commenting what a pain this is, and Will agrees. In the background, Duke Bass keeps yelling after them, shouting that he hasn't forgotten how their friends beat his son half to death and calling them savage pieces of trash. He mocks them for running away, saying in the end they're just commoners after all. Meanwhile, walking away from the scene, Begonia apologizes to Will, though Will seems pretty confused by the apology. Silk looks down with regret, thinking about how even though it's their day off, it somehow turned out like this. Then Begonia comments that if Will really thinks about it, it's all that Milk Girl's fault. Will asks who the Milk Girl even is. Begonia clarifies she means Charlansa, the biggest troublemaker in their mercenary group. An image shows a heavily bandaged woman with glasses and this super aggressive expression on her face. Begonia explains that ever since Charlansa half-killed the pig, Duke's son, she's had some weird grudge against him. Someone nearby comments what a terrifying woman she is. Meanwhile, Will suddenly remembers something and asks if her stomach is okay, noting that she kicked him. Begonia reassures Will that he's totally fine, explains he's always keeping his body reinforced with magic. Charlansa looks shocked, sweating as she questions if he does this the whole time. Meanwhile, Will sits on a bench reading through a book, noting that practice has been so fun that he does it every day. Begonia observes that training is like a change of pace for Will, impressed by such growth in such a short time. Then, Begonia suggests they go check Will's magic aptitude. Will asks what magic aptitude is. Silk explains they could see what kind of magic Will can use, like firing flames or producing water. She mentions it might be like the vice captain's teleportation magic or her own summoning magic. She notes it should be a rest day for Will, so they could do it another time. But Will gets excited, his eyes sparkling as he asks if learning that will make him stronger. Begonia confirms it can. Begonia notes he knew Will would say that, suggests they go since it's right over there. Silk walks through the city streets with Will and Begonia following behind. A massive tower looms in the background. Silk announces they're heading to the Magic Association. Will repeats the name in awe. Someone asks Will what kind of magic he wants to use. Will excitedly responds that he wants powerful summoning magic, like his master uses. They arrive at the imposing Magic Association building. Silk announces they've arrived and explains this is where they'll determine Will's magic aptitude. She notes that the chance of being able to use summoning magic is really low. Will asks what about him. Silk responds that if it's him, things might be different, says she'll teach him the details inside. At the Magic Association entrance, staff members rush around in a panic, yelling that Lady Silk has arrived and to prepare the finest room, asking why this is so sudden and telling each other to hurry. Someone mutters that this always happens. At the reception desk, a staff member thanks Silk for waiting. Will observes that everyone is rushing around. Then, a receptionist cheerfully asks, what brings Silk there today? Silk explains she came to check her disciple's magic aptitude and requests a room. Another receptionist asks where her disciple is. At the Magic Association reception, a staff member asks if this is Silk's child, just to confirm. Meanwhile, another staff member notes that everyone is getting restless just because Master Silk is here. A helpful staff member offers to guide them to the testing room. As they prepare to leave, other staff members gossip about the Phantom Beast Princess having a disciple, questioning if she's a bit too young for that. But Begonia turns and asks if they have a problem with that. Will quickly interjects to perish the thought, trying to smooth things over. As Silk walks through the hall with Will following behind, Will asks if Master is an amazing person since everyone was watching her. Silk casually confirms she's amazing and that Will is her apprentice. Behind them, one annoyed staff member mutters about such ignorance, wondering what that brat even is. They arrive at a luxurious room with an ornate chandelier and walls lined with bookshelves. The staff member announces this is the room they've prepared for them and says he'll take his leave here. Silk thanks him. Will observes how spacious the room is. Once inside, Silk tells Will that before checking his aptitude, they should study a bit first. Will questions if they're really going to study. Silk announces they'll be studying magic, and Will confirms with a simple acknowledgement. Then Silk explains she hasn't taught Will the details before and wants him to learn from this opportunity, telling him to listen carefully. Will enthusiastically responds, calling her master. Meanwhile, outside the room, a male staff member mutters enviously about how luxurious it must be, studying in a closed room with Lady Silk. Silk begins the lesson by explaining the techniques Will's currently practicing, telling him that body reinforcement and magic bullet are techniques called basic skills, which simply use magic power. She continues, saying what she's going to teach him now is a higher form of magic that changes depending on his aptitude. Silk explains there are two main types of magic aptitude, the first being elemental magic, which most people have. She describes how if someone has fire aptitude, they can conjure fire, and if they have water aptitude, they can control water. Basically, the magic people generally imagine. Then Silk moves on to the second type, explaining that special magic consists of abilities that can't be categorized by attribute, stuff like the vice captain's teleportation magic, or her own summoning magic. She notes that because they're special, Only 1 in 10,000 has the aptitude for them. Will reacts to the huge number, clearly shocked. Silk concludes that the lecture's over and says it's up to Will what happens next. She instructs Will to place his hand on the crystal. Meanwhile, Will mutters to himself, wondering if he can actually become a summoner. Silk says she doesn't know for certain, but her gut feeling is that Will definitely be able to. But before she can even finish her sentence, the crystal reacts dramatically with a bright flash of light. The crystal reacts, and Silk says, "Gray mist." She places her hand on Will's head, telling him that ever since she showed him Lil, she had a feeling they were kindred spirits. Will processes what this actually means for him. Then the result comes through. Aptitude. Summoning magic. Silk tells Will they should go summon monsters like this, and Will celebrates that he's the same as his master. Suddenly the door opens and someone notes that a summoner is only a summoner if they actually summon. Another person questions if they're really doing it here. A staff member announces that Lady Silk and her apprentice have returned, then says he's heading to the basement now. Meanwhile, one of the staff members points out that even if she's Lady Silk's disciple, she's still just a kid. A female staff member asks how her magic aptitude turned out, and the response comes back as summoning magic. The woman remarks that since she's Lady Silk's disciple, she must have some amazing aptitude. Then Silk and Will head down to the basement. Suddenly, the staff member freaks out, realizing Will is a summoner. He can't believe that even for special magic, the probability is incredibly low, and it's the same type as Lady Silk's. He thinks about how even though she's just a child, if she comes by again, she'll be recognized as Lady Silk's summoner disciple. On the stairs leading down, a cloaked figure sits there waiting. The staff member decides he should probably suck up to her. They arrive at the underground training ground. This massive space has enchanted walls and ceilings, making it absolutely perfect for training. Various onlookers start noticing that the Phantom Beast Princess has arrived, with some of them seeing the real thing for the first time. Silk asks Will if they should start summoning right away, and Will's surprised they're doing it already. Meanwhile, people around them start murmuring about summoning, wondering if it's going to be a new familiar or something. The crowd gets more and more excited. Someone wants to see who's stronger between them and Silk, while another person's asking for an autograph. People keep calling out to the Phantom Beast Princess as others express their admiration for Silk. But before teaching Will anything, Silk decides to demonstrate first. She begins her summon, calling for Lil. Then she commands Lil to kick them away. Suddenly, the massive Fenrir appears and completely clears out the crowd. Will watches in amazement as the crowd reacts around him. One person comments that it's an amazing Fenrir, while another notes that Silk literally just said to kick them away. The crowd reacts in shock while someone sympathizes with Will, calling him a poor thing. But Silk reassures everyone that wizards are the kind of people who won't die even if someone kills them. Despite all the concern around him, Will looks determined and confident. Then Silk kneels down and begins writing something on the ground. Will notices and asks what his master is writing. Silk explains that this is a magic circle, but Will has no idea what that means. She continues, warning him that if he messes up the summoning, the summoned demon will attack him. Silk tells Will she's writing the circle carefully so that doesn't happen. She explains that if he uses a magic circle as an aid, he can cast spells beyond his own abilities. She shows him the completed circle and explains the concept. The image he needs to hold is summoning a monster from another world. Silk instructs him to pour magic into the circle and chant, "Summon familiar," and Will nervously acknowledges the instructions. Will stares at the circle, processing what he's about to do. A monster from another world. Then Will begins channeling his magic into the circle, and energy swirls around him dramatically as the summoning activates. Silk yells asking if Will is okay. Will struggles, saying his magic power is draining so fast. Will tells himself this is tough, and he feels sick. Meanwhile, someone in the crowd observes that he's demanding an impossible amount of magic. Another voice warns that something bad might be coming, suggesting they should stop. But Will pushes through with determination, focusing everything he has, gritting his teeth and committing to finishing the summoning. Meanwhile, Silk calls out for Lil to come, summoning her own familiar to be ready. The crowd speculates nervously about what Will might summon. Someone mentions it could even be one of the legendary monsters known as the Seven Calamities, while another person lists possibilities like dragons or griffins, but dismisses them. Then an observer notes that whatever's coming is consuming more than half of Will's immense magic power, and despite carving the magic circle carefully, there's a real risk it might be nullified and become uncontrollable. Will continues the summoning, calling out for his familiar to come. Then Will completes the spell, yelling out the incantation, "Summon familiar!" The magic circle erupts with power as the summoning reaches its climax. Meanwhile, Silk charges forward with intense speed, yelling for Lil to be careful. Something dangerous is approaching fast and she can sense it coming. The summoning completes, and there's this tense pause hanging in the air. Will examines what appeared and declares it's cute. Then he reaches out and touches the creature. noting that it's cool and squishy with this totally delighted expression on his face. The sound pururun comes from the summoned being. Meanwhile, another observer starts to comment on what it is. The summoned creature is revealed to be a slime, literally the weakest type of monster. Silk admits she thought it might be some world-destroying monster given how much of Will's magic it consumed, but she quickly changes her assessment and declares this one is actually perfect. She mentions she could resummon something else now. Standing there with Will and the slime, Silk instructs him to give it a name. Will considers what to name his new familiar. Silk explains that if the little guy accepts the name, the contract will be complete. Will holds the slime up and announces that its name will be Im. The slime reacts to the name. Will celebrates with Im sitting on his head. Silk confirms the contract completed without any issues, and then someone suggests they should try for one more familiar. Will cheers at the idea. But Silk explains that slimes alone aren't enough for combat, and with Will's high magic capacity, he can handle summoning one more. She asks Will if he can do it. Will agrees, saying a strong monster should come next time and that he'll try his best. He begins casting the summoning spell again, calling out the incantation. As the magic activates though, Will notices something different this time, commenting that it's not as tight or draining as before. The summoning completes, and a goblin warrior materializes, wielding a spear wreathed in dark flames. The creature charges forward with aggressive energy. Someone observes that it's a goblin, one of the weakest monsters alongside slimes. Another voice asks Will if he shouldn't resummon something stronger, and begins asking for the creature's name. But Will insists this one is perfect, and excitedly explains that the goblin responded when he called out to him. Silk approves, saying if Will likes it, then that's fine. Will begins the naming process, stuttering out the syllables before declaring, the goblin's name will be Cobro. The goblin accepts. Enthusiastically, Cobro makes happy sounds as Will celebrates that the contract is established. Someone observes that while slimes and goblins are age-appropriate summons, they don't match the massive amount of magic power Will requested during the summoning. Meanwhile, Im sits quietly, contemplating that there are too many mysteries surrounding Will's existence. Then 2 weeks pass. Will is chasing after Im, yelling at the slime not to eat everything. He tells Im she should be a good girl like Cobro. The goblin warrior is shown training intensely with his spear, disciplined and focused. Cobro continues his rigorous spear practice when Will comments on what a hard worker the goblin is, asking if he's doing spear practice again today. Cobro mutters something about being weak and needing to become strong. Will encourages both his familiars, saying they should do their best together. It makes sounds of agreement, but first, Will needs to finish the laundry. Suddenly, someone spots them and calls out. A girl with a ponytail appears, announcing that she found the rumored shorty. Will looks confused and asks who she is. The girl introduces herself as Sharnoa. Will repeats her name uncertainly. Meanwhile, the narration identifies her as the mercenary group's biggest problem child. Sharnoa dismisses the problem child comment as a bit harsh and tells Will he's coming with her anyway. Will reacts with confusion. Sharnoa tells him they're going to defeat some villains. Will asks where they're going and why it has to be him. Sharnoa says she'll explain the details later and physically grabs him. She tells him to just come on already and carries him off. The scene cuts to a different location where someone warns not to hurt a slave because it'll drop his value. Another person tells his brother that he should work too since taking care of slaves is his job. The brother looks bored but agrees. Then the scene darkens as someone asks if the brother wants to take care of the slave instead. A menacing presence appears. Sharnoa and Will arrive at the Nudelia Kingdom royal capital slums. Sharnoa announces they're here and that she's going to catch a lot of bad guys. Will is carrying her on his shoulders and makes distressed sounds. Sharnoa asks him how long he's going to keep growing. Sharnoa asks where they are since the place looks so dilapidated. Will recognizes it as the slums, though it's different from where he was before, and notes this is the outskirts of the royal capital. Sharnoa explains the city was destroyed in the war with the Empire 6 years ago, but after the war ended, the nobles just left the people to their own devices and lived in luxury while this place was abandoned without being rebuilt. Will declares that nobles are bad people. Sharnoa asks who told him that. Will says his master told him, then pauses and questions the word master. Then he adds that Sharnoa is a bad person too. Sharnoa scolds Will for calling his elders by their first name and insists he should call her sister Shar. Will protests that he's not a chibi. He's Will. The narration identifies Sharnoa's full title as part of the fierce beast mercenary group, Blood Sea. Sharnoa acknowledges his name, and Will hesitantly tries calling her Sister Shar. Meanwhile, someone observing them walking together notes that the master Will is talking about must be the lowly chibi, referring to Silk. Sharnoa confirms Will is a smart chibi. Suddenly, Will yells out a denial about Master Silk. Someone observes that's how it is while a small dark-haired figure looks pleased. Will declares that Sister Shar is Master's enemy, but someone corrects him. she's not an enemy because an enemy is someone on the same level. Will agrees that Sister Shar is no match for Master. Then the correction comes that it's actually the opposite. Sharnoa suggests they put that aside for now and just look for what they came for. Will asks what they're looking for. Sharnoa announces, this is the kidnapper's hideout. Will recognizes the mention, saying the boss mentioned kidnappers too. Sharnoa explains her intuition as a criminal hunter for fun and tells him the place is around here. Will asks what kind of hobby that is. Someone says they should gather some information first. Will comments that Sharlni-san really is a bad person. Sharnoa spreads her arms wide and declares that when she beats up bad guys, she gets money, calling it the best. Sharnoa grabs Will aggressively and demands to know if he really doesn't know anything. Will insists it's true. He really doesn't know anything, admitting that's just the case. Someone tells him then it's fine. The scene shows tied-up people in the background as they extract information in the slums. Will tells Sister Shar he doesn't think this is a good way to do things. Someone calls him a poor thing, and Will asks why that is. Sharnoa explains the residents here are criminals who live by stealing, and there's no mercy for criminals. Will starts to protest, but Sharnoa cuts him off. He tries again, saying, if they don't do that, they can't survive here. Sharnoa tells him she knows that very well. Will tells her he gets it, and he'll stop doing it this way. Sharnoa says she'll try another way instead. Will reacts in surprise, asking what other way she means. Suddenly, a massive explosion of earth and debris erupts as Sharnoa demonstrates her alternative method with dramatic force. Sharnoa exclaims about what this is, then announces it's earth magic and proclaims she's the best in the world at it. Will asks how she finds them since it's so small he can't even see it. The two of them stand atop a massive pillar of earth that Sharnoa has raised from the ground, towering over the slum buildings below. Sharnoa announces they're getting off, and Will reacts with surprise at the sudden movement. Someone asks if she found the location, but Will admits he doesn't have the exact location yet. Sharnoa explains she deliberately stood out to draw attention. She continues saying what she's looking for is hostile gazes directed at them from the slums below. Then, Sharnoa charges forward with aggressive determination, declaring she won't let them get away. Will spots something ahead and announces he found it, and the two of them race through the slum buildings in pursuit of their target. Will calls out for Sharnoa, but she's vanished from sight. He realizes she disappeared and moved to the other side in an instant, her speed far beyond what he can track. Will arrives at their destination, breathing heavily from the chase. He announces they finally made it and identifies the building as the kidnapper's hideout. Approaching the entrance, he notes it appears to be an empty house. Will enters the building cautiously, excusing himself for intruding. Inside, the place is pretty bare, just a simple, sparse room layout. The hideout looks completely abandoned as he scans the interior. Then Will senses something feels off about the place. Beyond just the darkness of the room, there's this creepiness that puts him on edge. He calls out toward the second floor, asking if Sister Shar is up there. Sharnoa's voice comes from above, telling someone to hurry up and spit it out. Will reaches the second floor where Sharnoa is holding a dark-haired man who's breathing heavily. She greets Will, noting he finally made it. But Will protests that he told her he wouldn't do that anymore, referring to her violent interrogation methods. Sharnoa dismisses his concern, though, saying it's okay because this guy's a hit. She adds that all that's left is to find out where her comrades are being held. Meanwhile, Will mentions he got a really bad feeling from the room in the back right on the first floor. Sharnoa suggests they torture the captive until he talks, but notes the bad presence doesn't seem to be in this building. Will says he thinks he knows something. Sharnoa asks if they should check it out. The bound kidnapper struggles in his restraints. Will uses earth manipulation magic, noting there shouldn't be anything there as he searches with his spell. Sharnoa confirms she senses something like an underground passage beneath them. Meanwhile, Will asks if he's right about what he's thinking, sweating nervously as the realization hits him. Sharnoa casts Earth Chain to restrain the entire area, then tells Will they should go check it out, and he can't help but comment on how amazing earth magic is. Sharnoa notes that the kidnapper even put up a barrier spell and was hiding the door to the underground passage with luggage in a place like this. Someone mentions they definitely feel a bad presence coming from below. Then they find the basement door behind the concealed entrance, and Sharnoa says they should just go in for now. Sharnoa declares she's going to beat up all the bad guys and save the people they kidnapped, slamming her hand against something in determination. But Will calls out to her hesitantly, and she asks what's wrong, telling him to hurry up and open the door. The door opens to reveal a horrifying scene. Multiple bodies lie scattered across the basement floor, and Will or Sharnoa asks why everyone is dead. Will stammers that he doesn't know, completely shocked. Sharnoa demands to know what the hell this is, telling their captive to spit it out and explain what's going on. A large beast-like creature trembles before them. The kidnapper explains he just came to check on them because he lost contact with his team. But Sharnoa states it's a fact that he's a kidnapper and this is his hideout, and that he's the one who piled up the corpses. The massive C-rank boar stands among the scattered corpses in the basement, its heavy breathing filling the air as someone questions if this creature is the one responsible for all this. Sharnoa explains that it's a C-rank monster, a dead boar that can run over and kill a grown man with a single charge. Will asks if they were even kidnapping monsters now, and the kidnapper responds defensively, saying if he can't manage it and gets killed, then there's no point. He adds that the one who's wary of him and doesn't move is actually much smarter. Meanwhile, someone points out that people are buying these monsters at high prices. That one monster alone could build an entire house. Will admits he could kill that weakling in 5 seconds, but trails off before finishing his thought. Suddenly, Sharnoa commands Will to kill that thing. Will reacts with shock, protesting that she wants him to do it alone, but Sharnoa just looks at him and repeats coldly to kill it. Will recalls that he was killing things like that when he was 5 years old. Then Sharnoa tells Will that if he wants to be one of them, he has to kill that thing, reminding him that the fierce beast mercenary group is the strongest in the world. She starts walking away, leaving Will to face the monster alone as he responds that he'll do his best. Now Will stands alone, trembling as he faces the boar, realizing he's trapped in this situation. The boar looms menacingly before him, while Will thinks about what he should do, noting that Sharnoa is gone, and he doesn't know when the creature will attack. Will steals his resolve and tells himself he has to do this, then calls out his summoning spell, yelling for Emu and Kobro. The summoning magic activates with dramatic force, magical energy erupting all around him. Will's summoning magic erupts with force as both his familiars answer the call. Kobro charges forward, wielding his spear with fierce determination, making his signature sounds, while Emu bounces into position as well. The three of them face down the massive boar monster together. The situation becomes clear as they assess their enemy. Kobro states they need to take the boar down or they can't escape. Will tries to process what's happening, but looking at the massive creature before them, Kobro admits they can't win in a straight fight against this thing. Will decides to go with the plan they discussed earlier and asks if Emu can do it. Emu makes an affirmative sound. Will then asks about Kobro. Emu agrees to the plan. Kobro grips his weapon tightly and confirms he understands, ready to execute whatever strategy they've come up with. Then Will and Kobro charge forward together in a coordinated attack with Emu riding along. Will declares he'll win as they rush toward the boar, Kobro making his battle cry as they close the distance. All three of them moving as one unit against the C-rank monster. Back where Sharnoa is, the tied-up kidnapper questions whether she really thinks that kid can take down the monster. Sharnoa says she's leaving this to Will while she heads off to search and interrogate. Meanwhile, someone else nearby states he doesn't know who that kid is, but there's no way he can win. He points out that a C-rank monster is something knights are supposed to handle, not some random kid. Sharnoa fires back, asking if they're really just gonna leave Will to die out there. The battle keeps going as Will yells for Kobro to dodge. Kobro leaps away just as the boar charges through the exact spot where he was standing. The impact of the boar's attack creates this massive shockwave that tears up the ground. Kobro barely manages to evade the powerful creature's assault, like seriously by a hair. Will calls out, asking if Kobro is okay and can still move. Kobro reassures him that he's fine, but man, the boar's speed catches them off guard. It was way faster than they expected, and they barely dodged that last attack. But this is the only way forward, so they commit to sticking with their plan no matter what. Then in a flashback, Will explains his strategy to his familiars. He tells them they should decide beforehand how to move as a group, in case they ever have to fight alone without backup. Kobro asks if this is about strategy, and Will continues, saying that right now they can't defeat strong monsters head-on, but the captain once told them to protect themselves. If the three of them combine their strength, though, Will thinks they'll become many times stronger than fighting solo. Back in the present, Will asks Kobro if he thinks they can win, apologizing for getting cold feet at a time like this. Kobro responds confidently that they can win, because right now, they're many times stronger than when they're alone. Then Will yells for them to win as they charge forward, confirming they're not changing the plan and will keep going as long as his body enhancement lasts. Kobro acknowledges this. Meanwhile, the flashback shows Will explaining the plan for fighting strong, big monsters. The strategy plays out as one person keeps dodging and distracting the monster. Will taunts the boar, calling it a dead boar as he evades its attacks. As Will dodges the attack, Kobro strikes the distracted boar from another angle. Kobro then takes over the distraction role, shouting at the boar that he's the opponent now. The other one also provokes the monster to keep it distracted, showing their coordinated hit-and-run tactics. Will explains his strategy as he continues evading the boar's attacks. Even monsters don't have infinite stamina. When they get tired and their movements become monotonous, that's when he'll attack all at once. The plan hinges on wearing down the beast through constant harassment until it creates an opening. Kobro yells to draw the boar's attention over to him, and Will yells for the beast to bring it on, as they keep up their coordinated evasion tactics. The boar charges again with massive force, creating another explosive impact as it crashes through the area. Then the coordinated attack begins. Cobra strikes from above, while the boar is focused on Will, and the boar's eye widens in shock as it realizes it's been caught in their trap. The attack lands with devastating force, creating a massive explosion of impact. Cobra strains from the effort of the attack, but Will seizes the moment and yells for them to strike now, calling out for Imu. The boar lies exhausted on the ground, finally worn down by their relentless assault, and Imu appears, bouncing with its characteristic sounds. But the boar growls, still dangerous despite its exhaustion. It's drooling and panting, but tries to muster another attack. Imu positions itself in front of the beast, and Will calls out to Cobra. Cobra responds as they prepare for the final coordinated strike. All three of them move in unison. Will, Cobra, and Imu attack the exhausted boar simultaneously from multiple angles, executing their planned all-out assault. Their combined strike overwhelms the C-rank monster, finally bringing down the creature that had been too much for any of them individually. The plan was to blindfold Imu and have both of them attack the boar's weak point simultaneously, and the coordinated strike hits home, slamming directly into the creature's vulnerable spot with devastating force. Will pants heavily from exhaustion as the battle concludes, thinking it was a close call, but they manage to defeat Deadboar by themselves. He calls out to Imu as the slime bounces over, making its characteristic sounds. They won. Will collapses to the ground from sheer exhaustion. But then, as Will kneels on the ground next to the defeated boar, he's utterly confused about something. Suddenly, the supposedly dead creature stirs beside him. Sharnoa yells for Will to dodge. The boar's mouth opens wide, revealing its sharp teeth as it lunges straight at him. The boar charges with terrifying speed, despite being on the verge of death, the massive creature barreling toward Will with explosive force, creating a violent collision that sends debris flying everywhere. Will realizes the magic bullet he fired on the spur of the moment hit its mark perfectly. He wonders if he's actually saved. The boar growls as Will processes what just happened, his magic bullet actually working against the creature. It was a magic bullet that he hadn't fully charged, yet it still managed to blow away the supposedly dead boar. Then Will realizes something. His and Cobra's slashes didn't work, but magic might be more effective. He looks at his hand, knowing he still can't control his magic well. But if he gets close and hits the creature directly, it might actually work. Will stands in the darkened corridor, facing the reality of his situation, questioning whether he's got enough magic power to shoot the bullet multiple times. He knows he just needs to keep firing until it works, but then a darker thought creeps in. What if he fails? The doubts start flooding Will's mind. What if the magic bullet misses? What if it's released too late? What if the dead boar just keeps charging even after taking the hit? Meanwhile, Will sees Cobra struggling nearby. If the magic bullet doesn't work, he can't fall back on the same exhaustion strategy. Cobra's stamina is also at its limit after the prolonged battle. Then, the grim reality sets in. If this doesn't work, Will's definitely gonna die. Suddenly, a voice echoes in Will's mind, the words his foster parent left him with. He must not die. Will stands there holding Imu, suddenly struck by the weight of those final words and the realization of what he needs to do, all while the boar prepares to charge again. Then Will's desperate magic bullet hits its mark, and the massive boar comes crashing down with explosive force. The impact sending debris flying everywhere as the creature's enormous body slams into the corridor floor. Meanwhile, the kidnapper watches from the background as explosions continue erupting, and he can't believe what he's seeing, yelling that it won't stop. Will yells that he'll hide as Imu bounces alongside him, but the boar somehow keeps moving despite the devastating attack. Will pleads for it to stop, asking why this is happening. The kidnapper begs the creature to stop as the boar's fierce face fills the corridor with its roar. Someone recognizes the massive destructive power as Will's magic, enough strength to blow Deadboar to smithereens. But Will has gone berserk, and Imu realizes she can't stop him in her current state. Imu tries desperately to intervene, yelling for Will to stop as the rampage continues. Then suddenly, the boar itself cries out for someone to help. The creature is actually pleading, not attacking. Someone observes that at this rate, even Imu will be caught in the destruction. Meanwhile, Imu speaks to Will, telling him it's okay. She continues speaking calmly to Will, telling him to take a deep breath. She guides him through the breathing, instructing him to inhale, then exhale. The technique works. Will's magical rampage finally comes to an end. Imu keeps reassuring him that everything is okay now. Sharnoa appears and comments that Will is amazing. He took them down before she could even help. Then she kneels beside Will with a serious warning. If he uses that power again, he'll die. He doesn't have enough training to control that ability yet, so it's forbidden until he gets stronger. Meanwhile, Sharnoa asks if Will got something. Will confirms he did. Sharnoa tells them to search this room too as well. Suddenly, Will calls out for Cobra. The goblin familiar responds with his usual sounds. In another part of the damaged corridor, Sharnoa notices something and asks Will if he's okay. What about his injuries? Will says he's fine. Someone asks where Emu is, and another voice says, that's good. Then someone points out Emu's location over there. They find Emu transformed into an absolutely massive slime. The girls consumed everything in sight. The giant slime just sits there among scattered debris and items, looking completely bloated. Sharnoa yells at Emu not to eat that, but Emu seems pretty content with her meal. Then Sharnoa says it's fine though. She explains the situation to Will. The damage is so severe they can't return the bodies to their families. Leaving corpses around will spread disease, so Emu consuming them actually solves a problem. Emu admits she ate it all. Will processes this information, asking if that's really how it is. Meanwhile, Cobra makes his usual sounds nearby. Someone comments that this makes searching easier at least. Will wonders if maybe it was for Charlance's convenience. But Sharnoa cuts through his thinking and tells him to stop complaining and get to work. Will's mind flashes to the consequences. Someone mentions that this is why the vice captain gets mad at Sharnoa. Will thinks about facing Solio and the lecture that would follow. He refuses that fate. The situation gets worse. The boar beast has somehow revived again and is causing even more destruction. Will moves quickly through the chaos. Sharnoa observes that there's more trouble now. Someone comments that they must have pissed the creature off. The massive beast looms in the corridor as Will and Sharnoa face it down once more. Then suddenly, Charlancha appears on the scene. Cobra recognizes her immediately, calling out to his master. Charlancha confronts Sharnoa directly, asking what she's doing to Will. Sharnoa deflects casually, saying it's nothing really. But Charlancha presses the issue, pointing out that Will is clearly beat up. Sharnoa maintains her innocent act while Will just stands there battered between the two women, looking like he's been through absolute hell. Charlancha decides she's had enough. She declares it's about time she beat some sense into that milkwoman. The energy around her becomes aggressive and intimidating. Sharnoa fires right back, saying she's the one who's going to beat some sense into Charlancha, and throws in a shorty for good measure. Both women stand ready to fight, completely ignoring Will's terrible condition as they prepare to go at each other. Charlancha decides it's time to settle this. She declares it's about time she beats some sense into that milkwoman. Meanwhile, the boar beast is still present in the corridor, breathing heavily from the earlier fight. Sharnoa fires right back, saying she's the one who's going to beat some sense into Charlancha, calling her shorty. Both women stand ready to throw down, completely ignoring Will's battered condition as he sits collapsed between them. Then, Charlancha launches the first strike. She combines her assault with earth manipulation, sending a devastating attack toward the boar beast. The ground erupts with magical force as she demonstrates her combat prowess. The battle intensifies as Charlancha and the boar beast clash in close quarters, trading brutal blows. The impact sends shockwaves through the corridor as both fighters go all out, but the fight becomes increasingly dangerous. Will and Sharnoa dodge through the chaos as debris flies everywhere. Someone warns they need to hide quickly or they'll get caught up in this mess, while Emu watches the destruction nervously as the two powerhouses continue their battle. Even while fighting, the two women can't stop competing with each other. Sharnoa claims she's better than Charlancha, and Charlancha fires back that she's better even in a fight. Their clash sends someone flying through the air as they refuse to back down from their rivalry. Then Charlancha unleashes her finishing move. She calls out Earth's Fury and releases a massive earth manipulation technique. Enormous spikes of earth erupt from the ground in every direction, creating a devastating field of destruction. And Will watches from below as the overwhelming display of power tears through the corridor. But Charlancha isn't done. She fires back at Sharnoa, declaring she's not losing to her in any way. Sharnoa tries to respond, but Charlancha isn't backing down. Meanwhile, the tension between them reaches a breaking point, and their rivalry is about to explode again. Suddenly, Charlancha threatens Sharnoa directly. She questions what Sharnoa means by charm as a woman, and straight up tells her she'll kill her. A massive explosion erupts above the town, and the destruction from their continued battle tears through the sky as both women unleash their full power once more. The aftermath shows both women still facing off. Charlancha tells Sharnoa she'll make her cry someday, but Sharnoa counters that the lowly chibi will cry. Neither one is willing to concede anything to the other. Then someone suggests they should get along better, but the response is immediate. Both women and the others recognize this is straight up impossible. An aerial view shows the complete devastation of the hideout area. Buildings are destroyed and debris covers everything. Meanwhile, someone observes this is going too far, even for them. Later, Rock lectures the two women, telling them they can fight all they want, but not to cause trouble for others. Both Sharnoa and Charlancha sit there looking apologetic, and one of them admits this was too much and says she'll reflect on it. Sharnoa then shifts the focus, bringing up Will and what happened during the fight. Rock questions Will about his involvement, asking if Will was with them during all that chaos. Will explains the situation. He was about to get caught up in the destruction if he stayed there, so he carried Cobra and ran. Meanwhile, Cobra makes sounds nearby while Emu watches, and Will realizes silently that running away saved him. Rock states he still has a lot of questions for Will about everything that happened. Then the group gathers as Rock addresses the situation. Will asks who the man is, and someone explains he's the kidnapper who was in this hideout. Another voice says the lowly chibi should stay out of this, but Cobra tells his master to calm down. Sharnoa reveals she picked something up from upstairs earlier and presents some documents to the group. The papers reveal critical information. They mention the dead boar and Duke Bass, connecting the whole kidnapping operation to the corrupt noble. Then, Sharnoa pieces together the conspiracy, mentioning Duke Bath and the Phantom Beast Princess, realizing she was kicked by him before. She admits that, in other words, it's her fault this entire situation escalated. Meanwhile, someone explains the kidnapping motive. Apparently there's this new game among the nobles where they make monsters fight each other, but they don't understand why the nobles would kidnap people for this. Another voice notes this country is already being judged anyway. The documents reveal specific names and destinations. The kidnapped victims were being sent to House Bellier under someone named Sasha, and House Alfnard under someone named Lawrence. The noble conspiracy runs deep. Will hesitantly calls out to Sharnoa, addressing her as Rain, but Sharnoa just stares at him silently, her expression intense. Then, the dark-haired girl with elf ears explains the situation. If the destination is another country, there are two candidates: the Empire or the Holy Dragon Kingdom. The Shadows organization is typical of the Holy Dragon Kingdom, though. Suddenly, Sharnoa leans over Will, telling him if he's going to spill, now's the time. She warns he'll regret it later, but Will, sweating heavily, insists he can't say anything. The dark-haired girl notes that the person behind this is a demon. Meanwhile, Will, now bound and yelling in desperation, declares he doesn't care if he's tortured. He repeats that he can't say anything, but Sharnoa corrects Will's thinking. She tells him he has to tell her. It's not about whether he can or can't say it. Will trembles, understanding the gravity of what she's demanding. He explains that if he tells her, he'll be killed. But then the words slip out. The boss behind everything is Kuka. The moment those words leave his mouth, Will's face shows complete shock and terror at what he just revealed. Meanwhile, the group stands over the bound kidnapper. Will, Sharnoa, Charlansa, and the dark-haired girl all process this information together. Sharnoa realizes they've been had, and Charlansa demands to know what just happened, and if this is the enemy's doing. The dark-haired girl explains it's magic that activates with specific words, but this pretty much confirms their client is the Holy Dragon Kingdom, since she doesn't think the Empire would do something like this. Will mentions the Holy Dragon Kingdom and the Empire, but the dark-haired girl points out he's been saying that for a while now. She notes that magic can be used that way too. Then the dark-haired girl identifies the two nations, the Barbaroi Empire and the Elgeria Holy Dragon Kingdom. Both countries went to war with Nuderia 6 years ago. She describes the Holy Dragon Kingdom as this crazy religious nation that worships the divine dragon, a country that discriminates against everyone who isn't human, basically calling them monsters. Will asks if they shouldn't tell someone important about this discovery, but the dark-haired girl decides that for now, she'll collect everything that could be evidence. They'll handle this matter themselves. The dark-haired elf girl explains their situation. They can't rely on the country since the Duke is involved, which means the knights won't move. Meanwhile, the blonde ponytail girl grins confidently, finding it reassuring they can handle this themselves without the help of the Will Knights. She declares that the Fierce Beast mercenary group is the strongest, and they should head back to base. But back at base, the atmosphere shifts dramatically. The two girls who were so cool and confident just moments ago now look small and deflated. The blonde ponytail girl holds Will by the head while someone comments on how scary the situation has become, warning others not to end up like Will. Down below, mercenary members question if it's the vice captain's lecture time again. Then Rock calls out to someone about Begonia waiting for her turn to preach, but Begonia protests desperately that he hasn't done anything yet. Rock then addresses Will about the dead boar incident. He mentions hearing that Will apparently defeated a dead boar by himself, calling it amazing. Will admits it's true, but clarifies it wasn't just his strength. Will explains the full situation to everyone. If it weren't for Cobra and Im, they would have been defeated way before Sharnoa even arrived. If Sharnoa hadn't shown up at all, Will would have just self-destructed right there. His sword didn't work on the dead boar, and his magic bullets almost hit everyone because he couldn't control them properly. Meanwhile, Rock's fierce expression intensifies as he tells Will that he's still weak, but then adds that admitting weakness is a good start. Will acknowledges he's still lacking in a lot of areas. Rock continues, explaining that while Will's strength is definitely first-rate, he's lacking in many ways as a person. He tells Will to look at the example sitting nearby, and the scene shows Sharnoa and the blonde ponytail girl sitting together on the floor. Then Solio steps in to make a point. He gestures as he explains that they have someone who can make up for those shortcomings. There's someone who will apologize even if someone gets drunk and smashes up a liquor store. There's someone who will put things back together when the captain's free will causes schedule deviations. Another mercenary member interrupts, correcting someone named Yuya. The blonde ponytail girl smiles knowingly at the conversation. Will realizes the pattern, noting that it's always the vice captain who handles everything. Rock tells Will not to overthink things, that Will is growing up properly. Begonia agrees from the background. Then Rock announces that's enough for now, calling an end to the lecture session. Meanwhile, Charnoa sits on the floor looking frustrated, calling out to her master. Another mercenary addresses both Will and the captain. Charnoa asks where Charlansa is. Yuya explains she's being lectured for leaving all the post-mission cleanup to others and for putting Will in danger. The whole group sits together as Rock continues his lecture. Yuya comments they'll probably be stuck there for another hour. Someone else notes that it's gonna be tough. The mercenaries find the situation terrifying as everyone endures the captain's sermon together. Meanwhile, back in his office, Solio asks if someone's making fun of him. They hesitantly give a non-answer, clearly uncomfortable. Solio then questions whether they're just waiting in line or something, then sarcastically asks if they want a sermon too. Rock and the others quickly make their exit from Solio's domain before things get worse. Outside, Begonia admits he was absolutely terrified during that whole lecture. Charnoa complains she doesn't want to sit in Caesar anymore. Her legs are killing her. Then someone points out that Charnoa had business with Will and Silk anyway. Charnoa looks surprised, questioning what they mean. They confirm she needs to come with them for a bit, and another person agrees. Cut to Charnoa, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her weapons and equipment spread out around her, explaining it's been like this ever since she got back. Will watches her with growing concern, wondering if he caught some kind of disease or something. Charnoa reassures Will not to worry about it, explaining that this is actually a sign of evolution. Will repeats the word back to her, clearly confused. Then Charnoa clarifies what she means. She's talking about the growth of monsters evolving into higher beings. She notes that today's battle was probably the trigger and tells Will to leave Im and Kobro alone for a while. Will acknowledges that he understands. Meanwhile, Will thinks to himself about Im and Kobro becoming stronger as Charnoa continues to sit watch with Im nearby. Will stands there with fierce determination burning in his eyes. He tells himself that he needs to train harder and get stronger, that he can't afford to lose. Meanwhile, a dark-haired man with facial hair receives an urgent report that Squad 3's base has been completely annihilated. He asks who was responsible, and the answer comes back. It was a fierce beast. The dark-haired man crushes something in his hand upon hearing the news. Then a beast-like creature sits in an elaborate chair, processing the information about a fierce beast being involved, noting that finally, it has moved. But suddenly someone shouts to wait. A young man with spiky dark hair introduces himself as Rudel, explaining he's a thief, robber, and extortionist who does anything, claiming to be the leader of an evil organization in the slums. Rudel narrates that until a certain man came along, he was truly the charismatic leader of evil. The scene shows the beast creature sitting in the chair as someone approaches down the long hallway. The beast creature sits there in contemplation, noting that the fierce beasts have finally made their move. The slime sits nearby as the boss processes this whole situation. The subordinates panic, warning their boss that the fierce beasts are a crazy bunch, and if he's been targeted by them, he should seriously back off. They insist he knows exactly how dangerous these guys are. Then the beast creature extends his fist forward and questions whether he was wrong. One of his subordinates reacts with total confusion. The tension in the room spikes as the boss's demeanor shifts into something way more threatening. The dark-haired subordinate immediately apologizes in a panic, insisting the fierce beast isn't an enemy at all. The slime pleads that he'll face anything for the boss, literally anything, and begs him to stop the violence. But the beast creature just tells him very well, noting that the subordinate is way too valuable to kill over a single slip of the tongue. The beast creature boss declares that his goal has always been one thing. He explains the kidnapping was merely a necessity, so he did it. But his true purpose is revenge against the savage beast mercenary group. He wants to kill every single member and line up their heads. Meanwhile, later at the mansion, someone comments that it seems like there was a lot of trouble. Will mentions he got caught up with Sister Shar, and then the slime makes a small sound. Will asks if Im is okay, explaining that because of everything that happened, Im and the others have been exhausted ever since that day. Someone mentions it being an omen of evolution. Will notes that Master Sajit was an omen of evolution too, so maybe he should leave it alone. He looks at Im and says here, offering something. Then a concerned voice asks if Will is worried, and the innkeeper tells Will to go take the food to the person who needs it. Will runs through the hall carrying the plate, thanking Wardock and saying he'll be right back. But Wardock calls after him to not rush and just stay by her side for a bit. From inside a room, voices shout as someone demands Charnoa let go. Charnoa refuses though, saying she won't let go until they say so. Will wonders if Im will eat the food as the chaos continues. Will approaches with the plate when someone notices him. Then, a fierce-looking mercenary member declares that the kidnapper is their prey and they'll take care of it. Nearby, an argument breaks out. One person insists that if the Holy Dragon Kingdom is involved, they must report it to the country. The other says they'll tell the vice captain and demands they not steal their credit. The disputes intensify between them. Someone insists they'll handle it themselves because those good-for-nothings can't deal with this opponent. But then another voice argues they should work with the Royal Knights on this matter instead. The first person declares that either way they won't let anyone complain. They're taking care of this matter themselves. Footsteps echo through the hall as Solio walks away. Charnoa calls out, calling the vice captain an idiot. Solio responds that he doesn't care if he's an idiot or not. Will questions why Charnoa doesn't just give up already. A spiky-haired mercenary member stands there, ready with their sword drawn. Charnoa, still decked out in her armor, responds that she'll handle it secretly. She adds that the word give up isn't even in her dictionary. Meanwhile, outside the room, someone tells her they don't want to hear that from a lowly runt. Will calls her an exasperating idiot, but then admits it's actually true that the Royal Knights are pretty unreliable. He calls out to his master. Will mentions what's really bothering him about this case is the boss that the kidnapper brought up. Someone agrees, saying that's right. Then Charnoa notes that if the Holy Dragon Kingdom is the one pulling the strings behind the scenes, it's way too sloppy. Someone points out that they let the dead boar escape, and it ended up self-destructing. Another voice questions how the creature was even caught by someone like Charnoa in the first place. Someone says if it comes to this, then after all. But Will thinks to himself that there are just way too many things bothering him about this whole situation. Suddenly, Charnoa declares it's going to be a stealth operation, flashing a confident grin. Someone says they don't think so. Will points out that Charnoa isn't exactly suited for quiet movements. Someone insists it's true. They're way better at whining and persuading the vice captain than anyone else. Will protests, asking if this is really the time to be saying stuff like that. Meanwhile, another voice warns that the opponent might be the Holy Dragon Kingdom, so they've got to move now. Then Charnoa boasts that they're the Wild Beast Mercenary Group. She asks who annihilated the Holy Dragon Kingdom's invasion force in the war 6 years ago, claiming it was her. But someone immediately points out that Charnoa hadn't even joined yet 6 years ago, holding up a sign showing the current member count of 106 people. Charnoa flexes anyway and declares that regardless, she'll train for the day Will comes. Will gives her this super annoyed look, and she asks, "What's with that expression?" Charnoa insists her skills are proven either way. Suddenly, someone protests that Will is their disciple, and they won't let Charnoa do whatever she pleases. But Charnoa responds, that's not it. She's already decided to take Will on as her student. The tension escalates fast. Someone tells Charnoa it seems they didn't hurt her enough yet. Will just stands there shocked between them, caught in the middle. Charnoa grins and declares she's always ready for a challenge. Will makes a dramatic escape, yelling that he's going to feed the imps. Walking down the hallway, he reflects that since Wardock went to the trouble of making this food, he has to give it to them before it gets cold. When those two get heated, they lose sight of everything around them. He notes he almost got caught in another fight, so yeah, that was close. Meanwhile, Im appears in humanoid form now, wearing a hat and carrying food on a tray with bread. She calls out, asking Imuko to bring her some food. But suddenly Will appears and calls out to his master. Im turns toward him in her new form. Will exclaims that he can finally talk to Im, but the slime familiar in human form just looks confused and asks who Will is. Will calls out his own name to identify himself. A dark-haired armored figure appears, thanking Will for bringing the food and appreciating the gesture. Will processes this for a second and then realizes something's off. Someone confirms and asks if this is Koburo. Then the realization dawns that this must be Koburo in a completely new humanoid form. Meanwhile, Im strikes a pose and makes jiggling motions, showing off her new humanoid body. Someone confirms she's still jiggly like a slime, and the group observes that Im can now copy the appearance of whatever she eats. Despite looking like a human girl, she's definitely still a slime. The transformation is actually pretty amazing to witness. Im's original slime form and the bread she consumed are shown as the source of this crazy change. Then, the dark-haired armored figure comments on the corpse in the basement that was killed by the dead boar. Someone notes that even such a young child got caught up in this tragedy, and the conversation shifts to how Im's current form is based on what she ate. Im makes purring sounds in agreement, and Will acknowledges that it's a sad thing. But Im will inherit that child's feelings and live on carrying those memories forward. The armored figure notices Im's white hair and red eyes, commenting that the appearance is just like Will's. Someone asks Will if he deliberately made Im similar to himself. Will considers this and realizes now that it's been mentioned. There actually is a resemblance. But then Im explains that she likes this color because it's the same as her master's. Someone asks if Im can change the color too, and Im responds enthusiastically that she can totally do it. Im shifts her hair to black, creating this striking new look. She makes these satisfied sounds about the change. Will gets excited and declares it's amazing, saying he'll go show it to his master. Meanwhile, the group comments that both of Will's familiars evolved and became cool-looking. Someone notes that the transformations suit Will well, and that he even changed his clothes to match. Then the armored figure reports to Will that he can't find their master at all. Will wonders what he should do about the situation. He'd wanted to look cool and show off the transformations to his master anyway. The armored figure and Im search around the area when suddenly someone enters through a doorway in the distance. Solio holds papers looking troubled, realizing he's in a lot of trouble. But then someone spots Will standing with his evolved familiars and asks if they're friends. Will turns around as someone calls out, recognizing the vice captain. Solio's eyes widen in close-up as he notices Will. Will introduces his familiars properly. Cobro stands tall in his new armored humanoid form. Will stands in the center, and Im poses cheerfully beside them with dramatic effect lines radiating behind them. Will says it's Cobro, and Im adds that it's her too. Cobro makes an affirming sound. Will finally realizes it was Im and Cobro all along, understanding their transformed appearances at last. One of them comments that the transformation reveal didn't really work out as planned, and they mention thinking about striking a better pose when showing it to their master next time. Im notices something's wrong and asks the vice captain why he looks so pale. Solio explains he was investigating the case involving the kingdom's knights and the kidnappers, then curses under his breath, calling them damn idiots before apologizing for the language. Someone points out that calling people idiots is also pretty rude too. But Solio continues, frustrated that those idiots cut off the investigation without even doing it properly. He reveals that the upper echelons of the kingdom proclaim that the mercenary corps is not to interfere in this matter. The group confirms this matches what Sharnoa said earlier, and they realize that only their mercenary corps will act now. Solio explains the situation further. The pressure is coming from several troublesome key figures with Duke Boss leading them. He clenches the papers in frustration, reflecting on how the country has rotted because of the trash who only think of their own gain after surviving. All the capable people died in the war 6 years ago. Solio's voice grows more intense as he points out the cruel irony. Mercenaries exist to protect the people, but with those above acting like this, they can't even protect the people they're meant to. Im questions whether that's putting the cart before the horse. Someone agrees that it's exactly that kind of backwards logic, and the group chimes in with their agreement. Then Will speaks up with his own perspective. He admits he's just a kid and doesn't really get complicated stuff, but he thinks that's how a mercenary band should be. If a mercenary band exists to protect the people, then they have to protect the people, even if it means breaking rules or orders. Soleo's determination hardens behind his glasses as he declares he'll uncover every last one of their crimes and expose them for all to see. Someone in the background shouts that those bastards better be ready. The group watches Soleo's intense reaction, and Cobro, Will, and Im exchange glances, observing that the vice captain looks like he could use a little rest. Meanwhile, Im and Cobro are out looking for Will, hyped to show off their new evolved forms. Im says since they can't find their master either, they should just train instead. Cobro's all for it. He's pumped to see how much stronger they've both gotten. Somewhere else, Will's stuck in his own head, totally troubled by dark thoughts. The image of that demonic beast creature from the kidnapping operation just keeps haunting him. He can't stop thinking about how everyone in the mercenary squad is the strongest, so the kidnapper boss must be insanely powerful too. That person's gotta be a demon. Then Solio finds Will standing there alone and asks if something's wrong, whether he's feeling okay or just not feeling well. Will quickly brushes off the concern, saying he's fine. The scene shifts to this wide aerial view of the kingdom's capital city, showing the sprawling urban landscape and the mercenary corps' massive building. The narration reveals that the strongest mercenary band in the kingdom, the CQ Mercenary Corps, actually has a weakness. The rumored new apprentice who just joined lately. A cloaked figure watches the building from a distance. But the beast creature villain from before is already making his move. He speaks like he's guided by divine will, saying the divine dragon guides his actions. He declares that he's been waiting for the right moment, and now it's finally here. His dragon-like familiar reacts with anticipation, and suddenly, the villain's motivation becomes clear as he says, "This is all for Lutina," vowing to annihilate the rampaging beast mercenaries. Meanwhile, back at the mercenary base, Rock makes the decision, declaring they'll take down the kidnappers themselves. Solio's eyes burn with determination behind his glasses as he coldly states they'll annihilate them, and Will jumps at the chance, yelling that he'll do it and to leave it to him. Rock notes that this is the case they entrusted to the vice captain. Then someone asks where the other squad members are. Rock explains that Silk is on a sweets tour around town, and Begonia is probably at the casino. The group gathered in the dining hall discussing their plans. Someone comments that they're being too carefree for a time like this. Rock brings up whether they've made up their minds about the kidnapping case, explaining the political situation. Since the list of slave buyers included names like Duke Boss and other key figures of the nation, not only will the knights not move, but the higher-ups even pressured the mercenary corps to back off. Solio's expression is grave behind his glasses as he confirms what everyone suspects. Most likely, no, almost certainly, the upper ranks of the kingdom are involved behind the scenes. Im jumps in with his typical enthusiasm, suggesting it's simple then. They should just hit Duke Bass directly and make him spill everything. But Rock points out that the Duke is still a Duke, rotten as he may be, and they should make a proper plan. Rock adds that, even if they can take down the kidnappers, he doesn't want things to get messy later with political fallout. Meanwhile, Solio's eyes are intense behind his glasses. He tells the group to leave the planning to him. He declares he'll bring them to ruin and promises to bring the perfect plan. Then, the scene shows a glimpse of three key figures standing together: the bearded man from earlier, the beast creature boss, and Rock. Elsewhere, Will calls out for Im and Cobro as he descends a stone staircase inside the mercenary base. Suddenly, someone spots him and calls out his name, asking if the laundry is going well. Will responds casually. At the bottom of the stairs, Im and Cobro are hard at work doing laundry with clotheslines strung up all around them. Im excitedly calls out to her master the moment she spots him approaching, and Will gestures toward the work, showing that things are progressing exactly as expected. Will smiles and tells them they're doing exactly what he expected of them, then asks how everyone else is doing with their tasks. Im reports that everyone was really motivated, adding that the captain is taking action too, so there's nothing to worry about. Will nods, satisfied with the response. Then someone mentions that Wardock is going to be busy too, so they'll work hard to cover everyone's share. The whole group seems energized and ready to contribute. The scene shifts to a torch-lit stone corridor, where a voice questions why there won't be any monsters or slaves available for a while. The beast creature villain stands before Duke Bass in the dimly lit passage, explaining that, as the Duke may already know, they've drawn the attention of the fierce beast mercenary corps. He confirms he followed the Duke's instructions. Duke Bass acknowledges this, confirming he knows about the situation. The beast creature continues, explaining that he gave the mercenaries a warning through the night order, just as instructed. Then the beast creature villain sneers, declaring that those arrogant commoners deserve to die, asking if that isn't a wonderful idea. He continues, explaining that the boss won't be satisfied until he crushes the fierce beast mercenaries completely. The boss is currently busy preparing for that confrontation. Meanwhile, Duke Bass smiles, acknowledging the plan but adding his own concerns. He says this time they're holding a show where monsters will fight each other. But still, he finds it unforgivable for someone who made a fool of him to go on living as if nothing happened. The beast creature notes that if Dead Boar is no longer viable, they'll need a replacement monster, and he silently observes that the Duke is fearless in a completely different way from the boss. Then Duke Bass admits that a fight to the death between slaves does sound entertaining. The beast creature villain suggests they can secure 2 slaves that were supposed to be sent to the Holy Dragon Kingdom, asking if that would work. Duke Bass agrees and tells him to arrange it that way. After the Duke walks away down the corridor, the beast creature villain's expression darkens. Someone comments that he's awfully spirited. The villain snarls internally, cursing that damn old bastard who's always mouthing off and acting selfish, wishing he would just hurry up and die already. Meanwhile, the beast creature boss looms over Will in his elaborate armor, grinning menacingly down at the kid. The confrontation between them is tense and immediate. Rudel panics, calling out to the boss about how close that was. If the Duke had heard what was said, they would have been beheaded on the spot. The beast creature acknowledges that even a piece of trash like the Duke still holds power and remains an important piece of trash for their kidnapping operation. Rudel says he understands. Then the beast creature adds, "There's something else to discuss," as they stand in an ornate corridor. Will nervously tells the boss it's nothing, that it's fine. Then the beast creature states he wasn't hiding anything. He has no interest in this country whatsoever. It all began with a grudge from 6 years ago, and the only goal is to crush the fierce beasts. He's already made all the preparations and has a plan ready. They agree to move forward. Meanwhile, back at the mercenary base, preparations are underway in the grand hallway. Someone assigns Emu a task, and she confirms she's got it. Koburo is asked to help with something, and he agrees with a grunt. Over in the kitchen, a beast-eared mercenary member offers to handle all the cutting, since they're used to handling blades. The cook thanks both Emu and Koburo, saying the cooking is going really smoothly thanks to their help. Emu enthusiastically declares she'll handle the fire since her jiggly slime body doesn't feel the heat. The long-haired mercenary member insists they didn't sneak any bites. Will thanks them but warns against sneaking any food anyway. Suddenly, someone notices the honey container and asks what Will is holding. Will gets excited, explaining it's honey, a secret ingredient he learned from Wardock. They check the container and realize there's barely any left, it's all gone. Will mentions his mentor liked this sweetness too, and Emu also likes sweet things. Someone warns that it'll get dark soon and going out might be dangerous, but Will says it's close by and he'll be right back. rushing out to buy more. Will runs through the town streets trying to remember the way, thinking he needs to turn around here. A honey seller's voice calls out in the distance. Will notices there seem to be fewer people around than usual, even though the sun hasn't set yet. Then he spots the shop and confirms this is the place. Will walks through the narrow alley between buildings, trying to calm himself down. He tells himself not to be scared, repeating it like a mantra. If he can just get through here, he'll reach the main street. Then Will emerges into a wide plaza surrounded by European-style buildings, but the street is completely empty. He looks around and realizes no one is here. Not a single person. The entire area is deserted. Entire area is deserted. Entire area is deserted. Entire area is deserted. Entire area is